Hi, family. It's your Lizzie. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Onward Book Club. Tonight, we are speaking with the incredible Dr. Mariel Buqué. She is the author of Break the Cycle, a guide to healing intergenerational trauma. Stick around for this one. This is one of the most important books we've ever had on the book club. And let me look at these requests and see if she's here. Hi, everybody. Hi. So we're waiting for her to send a request to join. Hi, Naples. Hi, all the beautifuls. Hi, London. Coming to see you very soon. La 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 la. Let me look at the request. Here she is. Oh my goodness. Are you ready? You're not ready. You're so good. Stick around. Hi, Rich Cahill.
Hi!
Hi! Oh my gosh, there you are in person. Hello.
Hi, Liz. It's so wonderful to finally be here with
Oh my
you.
gosh, it's wonderful to see you. You're even more radiant in person than you are on the page. And that's saying a lot because you are extremely radiant on the page. Everybody, this is Dr. Mariel Buqué. She is the author of Break the Cycle. This might show up looking funny on your screen because things get flipped, as in life. Break the Cycle, A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. This is one of the most important books that we have ever discussed on the Onward Book Club. And I'm just going to give everybody a moment to send up hearts and love, and then we are going to turn off the comments so that we can focus on you with all of the attention that you so richly deserve. So send up some hearts and love, everybody. And I'm going to turn off the commenting. Okay, now it's just us and several hundred of our closest friends. Hi, welcome.
Thank
It
you.
is so nice to meet you.
Likewise, likewise. I'm so delighted. My sister is over the
Hi,
moon that we're
lady.
oh, oh, she's gonna love that, Liz. She is going to love that. So I thank you
Part of
for
my questions. I'm glad that she's here.
oh,
Uh, so I wanted to begin with we have a custom on the Onward Book Club of a letter of welcome that is written by my beloved partner in this endeavor, Margaret, who you've been in contact with as we've been planning this, because we just try to hype you up as much as we can and let everybody know who you are. So as we begin, Dr. Mariel Buqué has all the bona fides. She is a psychologist who trained at Columbia University, a professor and expert on intergenerational trauma who's appeared on Good Morning America and The Today Show, and in Self and Allure and in Glamour and on and on and on. We don't have enough time for everything that she has done. She's a sound bath meditation healer. We're going to be talking about that. She's given talks and healing workshops to employees at Google, Meta, and other major corporations. She has spearheaded a brilliant approach to healing. Okay, this is what I want you to all stick around for. A brilliant approach to healing that blends ancient indigenous practices with a modern scientific approach, which is astonishingly beautiful and moving to me and makes all the sense in the world, and I want everyone to hear about. And she is, of course, the author of the important book that we are here to discuss and learn from and celebrate, Break the Cycle, A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. It describes, to my mind, a perfect hybrid of established technique and unconventional thinking, and I cannot wait to learn how this holistic method came to be. So let's get into it. Dr. Mariel Buqué, welcome. Yeah. We love you already, and you haven't even begun. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time, and I've been waiting for this book for a long time. I've been seeing you talking about it and hearing you talking about it and feeling that it is so deeply needed. And I guess the first thing that I wanted to say was, before we get into the healing, we want to talk about what people are seeking to heal. And one thing I love about this book is that you reframe the word trauma itself. You like open up the word trauma to include shared trauma, inherited family experience, historical trauma, social trauma. As a culture, I think we have a very limited idea of what trauma is, that it's something that comes out of a big once in a lifetime accident. But you're talking about giving people permission to think about things like inherited money anxiety or the pressures of being the oldest daughter in a traditional immigrant family. So let's just start with your definitions of trauma and how you break down little t traumas and big T traumas so that we can at least be on the same page with language as we begin.
Yes, yes, I think it's a beautiful starting point, really important one. And trauma itself really is the ways in which we have mechanized, really from an unconscious place mostly, how to cope through adversities that happen in life. And I'm glad that you're in the question itself, like bringing in the fact that we have both small t and big T traumas, as we call them in the scientific and psychological language, because we can have seemingly small events that happen in our daily lives that still cause enough of a disruption or adversity that it can actually leave us emotionally marked. And when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about all of those events across the spectrum, small, maybe moderate or bigger events and bigger adversities that each have a capacity to actually make it so that we stay defaulted and sometimes even cemented in a coping mechanism that is driven by the idea that a threat can be coming at any point in time in our lives. So it basically is the ways in which our nervous system stays stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which are the basic kind of like ways in which our nervous system tends to operate when it's in a status of threat. And those small and big T traumas can be a host of things, right? Small can be the loss of a pet. It can be a breakup. It can be a loss of a job and a temporary financial inconvenience that it actually really kind of like it left an impression on you for an extended period of time. And then we have on the other side of the spectrum, we have the big T traumas, which is typically what we tend to believe like traumatic events are. So those fall under the category of like the traumas that we don't really need to kind of like almost kind of like negotiate as being traumas, right? Which is, having been in a major car accident, having been victimized by any kind of abuse, having been someone who suffered as a child, especially from a tumultuous divorce among, their parents, and a number of other things that are like those big events that really get marked in our hearts.
I'm struck right away in the book by this realization that feels like it's the inception for the whole idea of this pattern of work that you're doing that's specifically about intergenerational trauma and about the ways that we carry in our bodies and in our spirits and in our minds the collective trauma of people who we may never have even met, but who passed their pain, their suffering, and their anxiety down to us. You speak about working with a patient who you reached an impasse with him where you realized, I flagged it because it was so important. You suddenly understood the fog. You said, my client was the bearer of intergenerational guilt, sadness, grief, depression, anxiety. The list goes on and on. We weren't just working through my client's pain. We were working on the emotional burdens of my client's family and ancestors, people who weren't in the room with us during session and perhaps weren't even alive. This was a major therapeutic challenge. No traditional training in Western psychology has adequately prepared any of us, mental health clinicians, to treat patients for intergenerational trauma. There's no guidebook for when clients come to us with the emotional wounds of an entire lineage of family members. I was so moved by that recognition, and I wondered if you could speak to your unique capacity to have been the person to have noticed that, as somebody from a family that has lived in poverty, from a marginalized culture, from a family descendant of slavery, and why it is so important that there are women of color in these clinician rooms who will be able to recognize something that perhaps a more privileged white man wouldn't have been able to see, and would have just been like, this guy's just stuck, and would not have been able to see the intergenerational trauma. So I know I just said a lot there. I'm going to turn it over to you. Pick it up wherever you want to jump in.
Then I can really appreciate in particular, you highlighting the fact that those of us who are held at the deepest levels of margins within our intersecting identities, that we might hold a different lens that we can offer that holds perhaps not just a more vast understanding of what is happening in a person's life and in the wounding experience of trauma, but also that we also hold a capacity for holding compassion because it is such a familiar story. And for me, I know that it feels like such an eloquent and thankfully for my beautiful, beautiful editors, well-edited way to narrate that portion of my life where in reality, there was a lot of trepidation and some anxiety about how do I help this person when I haven't had the adequate training to be able to help them truly, deeply, and sustainably. And I thought that it wasn't just something that struck me as a dearth in my own training, but a disservice to the people that we are commissioned to serve through the process of therapy. Because people come in with these deep wounds, with these layered wounds, with these extensive historical and ancient wounds, and we are sitting with them trying to kind of, pick at straws and trying to figure it out. And I wanted it to be my mission to ensure that I was intentional and strategic about making sure that I gathered whatever there was on earth as far as wisdom and strategy to be able to help us heal in a way that felt tangible and in a way that had a cultural nuance, right? Like that there were real tangible cultural references and cultural a culturally responsive lens, but it's a bit beyond that. It's almost kind of like culture becomes the center of the work rather than we're just applying culture to make it culturally relevant. And trauma doesn't just, the work itself isn't just trauma responsive, it's trauma corrective. How do we then get to a point where we are truly healing the wounds and then influencing the next generation so that they don't have to be the cycle keepers into the next generations that also have to excavate these deep wounds that aren't being resolved through generations of families. So it became, a mission that I think I couldn't really escape, right? Like it's almost kind of like, I'm so grateful that it found me. I'm grateful that, my mind got open to this and that I felt a sense of duty to be able to approach this really hard topic and hard work. But for me, I also have so much gratitude that I was able to sit with the layers and the grief and the depth of this work with folks that needed to see a person that looks like me, sitting with that, with their stories.
That's so moving. And you introduced the term, you said you wanted to help people get free from continuing these cycles into the next generation. And I think the real torch of hope that this book contains, and why I am telling people I think it's one of the most important books that we've covered in the Onward Book Club, is that you don't just talk about where trauma comes from, although you certainly do, and you don't just talk about how it lands and stays in the body and the psyche, although you also do that. This is an incredibly pragmatic and hands-on and like forensic exploration of how to get it out of you and how to become what you call a cycle breaker. And so this becomes an incredibly inspiring story of hope that it is not required for you to continue carrying all of this, and that there are ways that this can be shed. And I was going to ask you if you could read, starting on the top of page 15, defining what a cycle breaker is, and what a cycle breaker does, because I found this to be so beautiful. You say at one point that they walk through life in active resistance to the status quo. Of course, that is so exciting. And I also love when you say many cycle breakers don't know how to identify themselves as such. They just know in their spirit that things have to be different, that this cannot go on. So if you could read this astonishing list on page 15 into 16 of what cycle breakers do, I think we would all get a lot out of that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of my favorite parts of the book, and it's one of my favorite chapters also, the first one. which is in part a love letter to cycle breakers, to the people that are so courageous and take on, you know, the mantle of like disrupting these cycles. So thank you for highlighting this part. And the portion of this book that we're referencing to says, being a cycle breaker means you see the generational wisdom and resilience that flows through you, choose to disrupt trauma responses in your lineage, acknowledge your part in keeping cycles going, are willing to do the inner work to cut the cord of pain, are willing to assume the consequences of disrupting those patterns, employ daily mind-based practices to stay conscious of your emotional experiences, maintain a lifestyle that influences your body and particularly your epigenome, which are the chemical changes in your DNA that can be transmittable intergenerationally in a positive way, ground yourself in spirit-based practices to regenerate your soul, acknowledge that your DNA is not your destiny, are no longer willing to live in a mindset that upholds the idea that you embody a genetic deficit, but rather are going to shift to a mindset that embraces genetic abundance, are willing to make adjustments to exist in a body that can help you absorb stress better, see the souls in your community as an extension of your own and treat them accordingly, disrupt systemic inequities that promote collective traumas that keep feeding cycles, are willing to spread healing knowledge to others so we can all more fully heal in this generation, see yourself as a living ancestor who has influence over future generations, have determined that the cycle of trauma ends with you.
It's so inspiring. It's like a hymn.
Oh, I love that.
There's something in the book where you say, you know, people say like this runs in the family, and the cycle breaker is the one who says, well, here's where it runs out. You know, like here's where it stops. This is going to stop with me. The reason I think it sounds like a hymn is because it needs to be, because you don't underestimate, or you don't ever submit that this is simple or that this is easy. I think one of the most powerful items on that list is cycle breakers are willing to assume the consequences of disrupting those patterns. I love that you acknowledge that, because there will be consequences of disrupting those patterns. The reason people stay in those patterns is because the consequences of leaving them can be very grave and severe. And I'm wondering if you can talk about those consequences and how we can fortify ourselves to be willing to endure what is sometimes lost, or the fear of what might be lost. Not everybody takes it well when you're a cycle breaker. Not everybody likes it. I mean, the simple way to say it is when you stop being a people pleaser, people stop being pleased, you know, but that's a sort of a lightweight way of saying the real cost that can come from doing this very, very difficult work of transforming your family history within yourself.
Yes, such an important point. And you know, the important thing for us to all consider when we're embarking on this journey and deciding I am a cycle breaker, or I am willing to be one, and I'm willing to do the work in order to step into that role, is that, as you mentioned, you know, there is a cost. We have to weigh, you know, our options, right, and determine whether or not that cost is, if we're willing to assume the cost of doing the work. And we have to understand that there is also something that is important for us to consider in that whole decision-making process, which is the possibility that, yes, there may be a cost, and interpersonal cost, and a cost to your identity, and many other elements that get ruffled up in the process of being a cycle breaker. And I'll take us through some of those in a moment. But the bigger consequence that we have of not breaking cycles is to remain in pain, and that is a psychological cost that we have to consider whether or not, you know, we're willing to assume for the rest of our lives. And so, you know, I think this is probably something that will sound very familiar for most cycle breakers, and it's the fact that for many of us, we're going to be a very unpopular person in our communities and our families, which probably means that we're going to be scapegoated or outcasted, or people will cut communications with us, that there is a likelihood that we may feel a deep sense of isolation in already a profoundly lonely world, which can get very heavy and can feel very grief-stricken, because we're talking about losses. losses of relationships, losses of connections, some of the most fundamental things that we have as humans, you know, to hold on to, which is the interpersonal connections that we have to one another. And so it is part of the reason why within the whole scope of the book, and I actually patted this down a bit from the original version because I had whole sections devoted to just how we co-heal with others, with other individuals who are also on the journey. But it was part of the reason why I decided to ensure that at every portion of the book I was saying, who are your co-healing partners? Who is that cousin, friend, colleague, you know, a person that is definitively doing the work and willing to commit to also helping to support you in doing the work. Because what we know is that it is going to feel lonely. You are going to disconnect from some people who have been foundational in your life. And if that is the case, and it's going to be really critical that you find the community that is actually going to help you keep yourself uplifted and keep you following the journey of cycle breaking so that you don't actually fall into moments of deep despair that you find it hard to get out of. And then what happens thereafter is that we actually backtrack and say, you know what, even if it's, you know, unconscious, we'll say, this is too hard. I'm just going to go back to the way that things are and remain a cycle keeper, because the consequence of disconnection is far too great, far too consequential, and far too hurtful. So I would rather just stay in the patterns.
It's interesting because I think of the times in my own life where I've been a cycle breaker. I think it's akin to being a whistleblower in a way, in a corporate setting. Like, you know, they're not going to take it well, and you might lose your job. You know, like it's really quite scary. I don't ever feel like I had a choice. I think in a way it's not a decision. I think, well, let me rephrase that. I do feel that I had a choice. I reached a point where my body was either going to break down and no longer function, and I was going to have to take my own life or do some, you know, I'm not saying that lightly. Like it really did get to a point where it's like, I'm either going to die or my body's going to be so full of disease and inflammation, which we can talk about later. Right before my first divorce, I could barely walk. I was 30 years old. My entire body was swollen. I had migraines. I couldn't digest my food. My hands stopped moving. My knees were inflamed. Like my entire body was like, I can't do this for another day. While my mind was saying, but you have to, because so many people will be disappointed if you don't stay on this path. And it really did become a choice where my body was like, I'm out. Either we're out together or I'm out, which I think is so compelling. And you speak about the body thing in here. But what you also offer in this book, there were 4 adjectives that I wrote down to describe the book as I was reading it: comprehensive, forensic, generous, and kind. And where I find you to be so generous in this book is that you offer the most abundant amount of solution in here about how you can nurture yourself and transform yourself as you are being a cycle breaker. And this is where I think the book becomes really fascinated, and it expands. And this is what your whole life's work is about, is that it expands beyond what we know to be merely the psychological or the modern or the scientific. And you reach back into all of these wisdom traditions and you pull in sound healing. You actually have a free sound meditation QR code in the book. Like, it's so generous. Like, who gives people that? You have the recipe for your grandmother's lemongrass tea that you add in the book. You've got an appendix of intergenerational trauma healing grounding techniques, from trauma-informed yoga to ventral vagal nerve stimulation, body scans, rocking, humming, yoga nidra, reflexology, sauna treatments. You've got all of these things, like you're drawing from this enormous ocean of resources, recognizing that you can't just heal somebody sitting in a chair in a therapist's office talking about your problems. There's got to be more to it than that. And what I want to speak to is how you found all of these things yourself. And maybe let's start with the sound healing, because it seems to be such an important part of your own work and your own healing, and why you felt that it was so important to include and how you got your editors to do that, because books are not traditionally places where sound healing meditations are found, because it's not an audible
Yeah.
it's not an audible medium. So so how did you end up coming to that and discovering all these healing modalities for yourself?
Yeah, you know, I gotta say, I have an incredible team behind me that has believed and championed, you know, this work from day one, and every single word and every single intention was nurtured. And so I know that the literary world, you know, it doesn't always look like that for all of us. And I'm so grateful that they were willing to incorporate something that felt so important for me to incorporate, because what I wanted with this book was for it to feel like it was a full therapeutic protocol in a $30 package. And that could feel like for those of us who lack access. I thought about my own family and the fact that, you know, we come from places of deep poverty, and there are many people like myself and like the people that I come from that wouldn't be able to afford therapy sessions on a week-to-week basis. Now, of course, this can be an accompaniment, and many people have told me I took this section to therapy and we like unpacked it, and it's been beautiful hearing that too. But what I really desired was for people to be able to go into this book time and again and find the tools without feeling like they needed to go out into a world where, you know, we have things are expensive, right? But the actual journey towards even sound bath meditations, I was actually very fortunate to have a couple things interspersed into my life, both on the personal and professional side. So while on the personal side, I was already involved in yoga practices, and I was already a person that was very stimulated. Oh, you know what? This is actually a beautiful, beautiful part of my journey that I have to share with you. I have my You Pray Love with me because my sister and I actually started on this journey together, and this was the first time that she and I were actually together getting into the cycle breaking.
What?
No, so full circle. You have no idea. There's like, she will vouch by this. Like, she will tell you, we not only were some of the first readers of the book, but we like went to see the movie together, and this was our journey. And we actually, you know, started traveling the world together, just really kind of like opening our hearts up to things. And Bali being one of those places that we visited together and experienced a lot of profound healing there. So it's just so beautiful that I was on that personal journey. And thank you for your words, your work, your wisdom, and your love that you shared with us through Eat, Pray, Love, because that was actually very pivotal in my life. And then, you know, I know,
Making me cry.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just when you and Margaret reached out, I was like, you're this, no, like, how does this work? How is this? It was, I'm still in awe, like that this is how the world has like organized itself to create a 360 moment. So I'm really grateful for that. And so while I was on this journey, I was also really fortunate. Part of me getting my doctorate was a part of being on that journey as well. It was me abandoning the life that was inflaming me, basically, and diving into a world where I could be of service, and I could be of service to, you know, a world, right? At that point in time, it was, you know, locally in New York, but I was able to partake in a holistic mental health. Before it used to be called like integrated mental health, but it was like we were all the people that folks in the psychology world were like, what are they doing? Like no one really kind of like, you know, bought into the idea of holistic psychology back then. And we were really just like working with the ancient wisdom that we knew was incredibly important to integrate into the work in order to reach the people at their heart. And so the fact that these two things were, you know, a part of my journey and then eventually became synchronized was really critical. My cousin actually, because she knew that I was on this path and that I was then transitioning into this fellowship, she bought me my first sound bowl, and that's where I started getting my training and started really diving into Eastern philosophy and Eastern, theories around how we mechanize around healing around the body. And it all really just came together when I started utilizing it and integrating it into therapy and seeing tears that were being held for decades just roll, and seeing people's shoulders drop, and seeing the immense amount of opening that was happening, that in the interchange between therapist and client that is just driven by dialogue, the talk therapy, it wasn't facilitating that kind of release. And so I knew I had a mechanism that needed to be integrated in a very intentional way, and I wasn't going to let go. I was simply going to learn as much as I could about how this can help and how I can make it a real cemented practice in the field of psychology.
Can you, for the uninitiated, can you put on your scientist hat and share what actually physiologically happens in the brain and in the nervous system with sound bath meditation and with certain resonances of sound? Because I'm fascinated by this. I've had some amazing experiences in sound baths as well, but I don't know that I know it's got something to do with brainwaves.
Yes.
So that's me putting on my science hat. It's a brainwave thing, but I'm assuming that you know a little bit more about what it actually does.
Yeah.
Besides,
yeah,
feel good.
I feel good, which is a huge bonus, right? And the beautiful part of that bonus even is the fact that it not only helps us in the moment, but we have to really consider the accumulation of these practices in our minds and bodies, and the fact that there are tangible ways in which where we start absorbing healing, that our minds and bodies start defaulting to that healing more and more because of the ways in which we start restructuring our neural pathways and many other ways in which our bodies start to then disinflame and like really shift towards health, right? The upward health spiral, as I call it. So with sound baths, so there are different hertz and different levels and different sounds that emit specific frequencies that actually help us to create a relaxation response within our minds. And our brains definitely, tend to absorb that kind of frequency in a way that helps it to release and relax. But the added bonus to that, and the beautiful part of how our bodies take in sound, is that, of course, we know we're widely made up of water, right? And so we have these sound baths and these bowls that emit these micro vibrations that actually, hit the water in our bodies in a very microscopic way. These ways in which they start connecting to the water. And if we think about it, for example, like if we think about a body of water, and we think about it being shaken up and really, like some of the particles, they start kind of like, moving around. And when we think about the fact that a lot of stress is hormonal, and we have these hormones that are upsurged, and that there's a lot happening that causes inflammation, these micro vibrations have a way of actually almost kind of like shaking our body back into balance. And it does it at a very microscopic level, right? But like I mentioned, there is an accumulation effect. So we have, over time, the ability to shake up our bodies, shake up our bodies, shake up our bodies until our bodies start bringing themselves into a state of balance because of all the shaking up that's been taking place. So it's a beautiful way in which both, from a brain wave perspective, but also from a vibrational kind of like body, water, energetic kind of like perspective, we're experiencing so much healing, which is why it's very mind-body. And of course, there's the spiritual elements because of, it's a spiritual practice in essence, and it definitely derives, from Buddhist practices and Tibetan culture. And so we can, of course, like see that element in there and see it as a very mind, body, spirit type of practice.
I find it so exciting. I am fascinated by ancient technologies. ancient spiritual technologies and ancient emotional technologies and ancient medical technologies. The respect and reverence that you show toward those technologies from across the world in this book is so moving to me, and powerful, because, you know, for at least 100,000 years, people who had exactly the same biology as us were walking around a very stressful world. I mean, we didn't, this is of course the age of high anxiety, but we didn't invent anxiety. Anxiety's been around for a long time, and people have had tens of thousands of years to slowly and carefully develop systems to release it. And it's almost negligent, I think. Well, I think it's, I'll take out almost. It's negligent for contemporary medical practices to disregard tens of thousands of years of wisdom traditions, that know how to handle the difficulty of the human life. One of the things that you call upon in this book, are tapping into your ancestral higher selves as a way of honoring and including your ancestors and your history, instead of just blaming and rejecting that history. You know, so instead of just saying, like, I'm carrying the ancestral burden of all of this, you know, intergenerational history, that you could see how that could prejudice you against your family members for having, you know, but you're calling upon them in a sort of positive way, reminding you, all of us, that the opposite of intergenerational trauma is intergenerational resilience. There's such beautiful stuff to be found in the same lineage that passed on its pain, also passed on its wisdom and resilience. Somebody wrote in the comments, knowing that I was going to be talking to you, could she talk about intergenerational glimmers, she called it, that it's not just triggers, it's also glimmers. You know, our ancestors didn't just suffer, they were also strong and brave. And I wanted to know, if you don't mind speaking about it, if it's not too personal, how you have found that to work in your own life, and how you have called upon your own ancestors, and how you see them, how you hear them. Is it a visualization? Is it a meditation? Is it written? Do you feel it in your body? Like, where do they live inside of you? If it's not too intimate a question to ask.
It's a beautiful question. I love it so much, and I haven't been asked that question in that way, really. So thank you for that. I have tried my best to be incredibly open to however my ancestors wish to reach me. And, you know, even in times past, before I was even adding the language of ancestral wisdom and resilience, I was already getting a sense of how both my ancestors that are in my direct lineage, that I can say this person's in my actual family tree, and those who are the people that are just simply, perhaps we have a connection, right? But they have helped me through very hard times in my life. And one that I mention all the time is like Nina Simone. And the way in which Nina Simone's work has made its way into my life during moments when the pain and the despair was so profound, and the ways that just her language and her voice and her intention behind her art was able to make its way into my world precisely at the times that I needed. It has opened me up to all the possibilities of how ancestral wisdom and care and love can make its way into our lives. But from my direct lineage perspective, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother in particular, who was the one that I actually got to experience, because my paternal grandmother passed when I was very little. But my maternal grandmother was someone who I felt the depth of her love. And now in my, late 30s, and even in my early 30s, I was very much feeling this presence of not feeling alone, of not being alone, even when things felt like they felt like they were kind of ruffling me a bit. And when I started to open myself up to all the possibilities, I started dreaming about my grandmother. My grandmother actually, which I've never like said out loud, but December 19th, 2022, I received a dream where she was like, "This book's gonna be a bestseller," and I was like,
Oh,
I wrote, I got up and journaled because I was like, I just need to like cement this as, just in case I can always reference back to the exact day, the exact dream, and exactly how it happened because this will be really interesting if it actually happens. And that wasn't what I set out, for Break the Cycle. Break the Cycle is a healing guide for that will hopefully have ripple effects in this generation. That is my mission. But I thought it was so interesting that she would pop up in my dreams and say that. And so, there's a lot of like ways in which I feel like I'm just surrounded by the wisdom, the love, the care, the resilience. And then there are ways that are more, let's say, like action oriented on my part. Like I write letters to my grandmother instead of writing in Dear Diary, right? Like I say, Dear Mama, and then I start with just orienting her around my world, how I've been, what I wish for her in her rest, in her eternal rest. And it's a way that I can feel her presence and her love just as I write. And I write, hand write. I don't type my journal so that I can feel like I'm in the moment, just communing with her. And so that it can be so variable. And I've heard so many iterations of how people incorporate these, connections to ancestors into their lives. And I'm always in awe as to the different ways that it can happen. But for me, it has really taken those forms.
I'm thinking to add two thoughts. One is that my beloved friend Martha Beck was working on her doctorate at Harvard, and she was talking to all these extraordinary women, and she kept asking them, extraordinarily successful women, she kept asking them how they had gotten where they were. And they were giving these sort of pat business school answers that she felt were not the truth. And she just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until each one of them eventually said to her, "Can you turn your tape recorder off for a second? Can I tell you the truth? Can we just talk? Can I just tell you the truth?" And every single one of them spoke of mystical guidance. Every single one of them. And these were women like an admiral in the Navy, like the head of a Fortune 500 company, the mayor of a large city. Like, these are not people who were in any way, these are people very much with their feet on the ground in this world, receiving guidance from spirit in so many forms. They would say something like, "I had a dream, I had a vision. My grandmother came to me. I saw the Virgin Mary. I felt God's presence, told me to go to Baltimore and run for mayor." Like whatever the thing was, these things that were beyond the rational mind. And I love that you're introducing into the realm of psychology, and that you've been able to do this in your career, that you've been able to introduce trans-rational, um, the stuff that our logic mind can't comprehend. Um, because I know for myself that I cannot heal without trans-rational and trans-logical healing. I, I mean, I've done it. I've tried to do it by reading books and talking about my problems, but it's always nice to have somebody to talk to. But the real deep healing that has come in my life has come from voices that only I can hear. And I love that you encourage people in this book to reach for that in whatever ways they can. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for appreciating it. And, I do believe that a lot of the ways in which we used to connect and used to heal has been so extracted from us, so pathologized, so demonized in some instances, that it has disconnected us to such a profound level that so many of us are unwilling to really experience the messaging of the universe, and really sit with it, which is such a disservice. Can you imagine how many messages are reaching folks that they're just discarding because they have been taught and socialized to not listen, to not connect? And I think it would be um, a beautiful thing, a beautiful byproduct of people reading this book to reconnect, to re-engage, to go back into even their own ancestral roots and say, there was wisdom here, I'd like to gather it back and to utilize that as a part of their healing. Many people oftentimes tell me, like, you feel so grounded. How are you so grounded? And I tell them, listen, I not only developed what I think is a real tangible recipe for any of us, because a lot of the mechanisms that I utilize in my practice and in this book are accessible to just about anyone, or there are modifications that can make them accessible. But I use them every single day, every hour of every day. And anyone who's connected to me in a personal way knows that this is literally what I live by. And that has made it, it almost kind of, it makes me like so much more intentional about spreading the word about how we can root back in and reconnect and get ourselves back into our truths that have been there for such a long time, and that we haven't had the intergenerational privilege of connecting to, but now we do, because we know it's available. Now we have choice. Now we can, regather whatever is available as far as wisdom that has been left behind, and connect to it in a way that can help us to feel more grounded in this generation.
I love it. I just love everything about this book. It's so rich, such a rich constellation of gathered wisdom that you've collected here. I wanted to touch on something that I think is so important that you say, that I do not think gets said enough. When we're talking about healing, and we're talking about family healing, and we're talking about intergenerational healing, my experience is that there is a prejudice toward forgiveness that is sometimes toxic. That there is a prejudice against cutting certain family ties. There's a horror, there's sort of a collective horror in the culture that, above all, family is the most important thing, and no matter how much they've hurt you, and no matter how destructive it's been, and I've experienced this in myself. I've inherited somehow, some wounded part of me inherited some sort of messaging that I don't think was ever explicitly taught, but I took it on in all my spiritual studies, that says that if I were a truly ascended master, if I were a truly enlightened being, if I were a truly good person, I would be able to tolerate anyone. I would be able to be in a room with absolutely anybody, no matter what the nature and violence of our history, no matter how much harm I see them doing to others, no matter how, just no matter how bad it gets. And I would be able to sort of float through it on a cloud of grace and be utterly impacted. And if I'm being impacted, that means that I'm not good enough. I haven't worked hard enough. I haven't forgiven. I'm seeing flames go up. So I think people are hearing me on this. I have come to believe at my ripe age of almost 55 that not only is it okay to walk away, cut ties, and disconnect from people forever, it is also at times necessary, and also at times perhaps one of the things you came here to do karmically, and part of being a cycle breaker. And I know this is anathema to parts of the Christian tradition, that say that forgiveness is the highest value, and I think forgiveness is a very high value. I have found in my own life, paradoxically, that sometimes the only place I could get to where I could find forgiveness was at a safe distance. Mm-hmm. That once my being was safe from a destructive being, then I was able to actually bring in forgiveness and genuinely sit in that feeling toward that person of love. But I could not do it from a close-up place because I wasn't safe. You say in the book that forgiveness is not necessary for intergenerational and family healing, and I just want to let you riff on that for all those people who are sending flames up. This may be the most important thing you all hear tonight, or whenever you hear this message. So please, if you could let us know more about that, I think it could be very helpful to some people.
Yeah, absolutely. There is forgiveness and there's toxic forgiveness, and the toxic forgiveness actually is what sets us on fire, on top of already feeling like we're ingesting the poison of dysfunction, of hurt, and of trauma. Then on top of that, we're setting ourselves aflame by going into burning houses that are, filled with a contagion effect of trauma and all kinds of, deleterious and harmful interchanges and dynamics. So for any of us that are engaging in the healing journey and that we're feeling like we have this open wound that continues to be reopened every time we engage in a process of connecting with the people that continue to hurt us, it's important for us to remember, like, when we have a wound, the wound care requires us to seal it, right? To nurture it, to keep it in a place that is safe, and to ensure that the scarring forms, and that scar tissue allows for there to be a barrier between anything else and the skin, right? And so the same goes for the wounds of the heart. We have to ensure that we are sealing ourselves in the journey, and also containing ourselves within community that is intentional about supporting us and giving us the loving care that we may not receive in these homes, in these dynamics, in these spaces that are, continue to be diseased with trauma. And it's going to be important for us to just hold on to that process and hold on to that idea of care and of containment. If we are to do that, and if we are to do that in a way that is going to help us to create sustainable healing, and healing that, remember, we're talking about healing that is not just, oh, I feel better. It's healing that is going deep into our cellular memory. It's healing that's making it so that our genetic makeup, whatever genetic expressions have been formed and cemented in our family line, that those are transforming. And if we're doing that level of depth work, we can't go back to the places where these wounds continue to be brought to the surface. So it's really important, I think, in the process of thinking about forgiveness in the scope of all of that sometimes forgiveness is just, it's that process that continues to reopen those wounds, because we're not honoring ourselves. What we're doing is we're honoring the ideas of intergenerational loyalty, of making sure that we stay loyal to the family or the people that are just a part of our family history, or they're just, they're family. You should forgive them, or they're family, so you have to give them a hug and you have to be courteous whenever you're at the family dinner. Instead of actually lending ourselves to those ideas, we can hold ourselves to a higher regard and also a higher level of care, which means that we are going to have to create a distance that won't allow for that toxicity to permeate our hearts and like make it into our souls in a way that doesn't allow for the healing, the real deep cellular and generational and long-standing healing to really take place. Sometimes the only method is distance and non-forgiveness, and that is okay, and that is incredibly honorable, and that perhaps is going to be one of the hardest and most essential parts of your healing journey.
Gosh, it's so important for you to say this. And, it's so powerful. It's powerful medicine just to say, and I like to think that my role in the world as a public figure is to be a walking permission slip. And I hear you being one now too, to have the generosity to be a walking permission slip, to say that this is not only okay, it's not a failure on your part, and I love this idea of no longer lending yourself toward toxic family loyalty, if it is making you sick. And given the fact that you write that 70% of primary care visits are the result of an underlying stress-related reason, right? 70%. You also speak about inflammation, and I want to take a little moment to talk about inflammatory illnesses. And if you could sort of take a second to list what some of those are. the amount of strain and stress that so many people are carrying in the actual tissues of their bodies, and how could a loving God want their child, their beloved creation, to be this cauldron of inflammation and stress in the name of being a good person, a good daughter, a good sister, a good family member, right? Like, how could that possibly be what that which created you would want for your highest possible good? It doesn't make any sense to my heart, to my literal physical heart, that no longer wants to carry that much pain, in order to be a cooperator to everybody else. So I wondered if you could speak about inflammatory illness and the role of stress in that, and if you could, for those who are listening, perhaps offer, not that it's a simple thing, but what you think is, in your experience, is one of the most effective ways to address inflammatory illness that's due to stress and intergenerational trauma.
Yes. You know, inflammatory disease is probably that signal to us that we've been living in inflammation that has been created in by way of stress for an extended period of time. Because usually when inflammatory disease comes into play, that means that we're already looking at something that is being diagnosed as chronic, right? And that it means that the body has been capturing stress and inflammation for an extended period of time and has become deeply exhausted. And that our neurological wear and tear meter has been worn down, and that we no longer have the same version of immunity, of body resilience, body strength to actually fight off illness. Some of the most common, I would say, ways in which stress that is the chronic can actually manifest as body illness has been through metabolic diseases, like any diseases that are captured in the heart, that are captured in our metabolic processes, diabetes, a lot of hypertension, right? Like a lot of these things that we tend to say that runs in my family. And I always ask the question, does it run in your family, or is it intergenerational trauma? Is it the trauma that's been absorbed for generations that no one has really known is connected to the stress that everybody has been enduring for such an extended period of time? Other diseases that are also a part of that process have been diseases connected to autoimmune conditions. And these are most prominent, and especially most prominent in individuals that identify as women, people that are women and femmes that are living in these bodies and in these societies that continuously suppress them in numerous amount of ways. But the world is so vast that we also have a lot of people that perhaps don't identify as such, but still can be held victim by way of their bodies, like having accumulated stress to autoimmune conditions. But I mean, the entire category of autoimmune conditions. We're talking lupus, we're talking rheumatoid arthritis, we're talking the full gamut. In addition to that, stress has also been mapped to certain cancers. Although that research is a bit newer, and of course, we have a lot of other markers that also to consider in reference to cancer, like which are also connected to stress, right? But there's a lot of research that still needs to be done. But if we think about people that are economically impoverished and have been for decades or generations, and then you add on the fact that they may live in food deserts, right? The culmination of prolonged stress with poor diet for an entire
And
life.
Air quality and water quality, the neighborhood next to the chemical plant, the neighborhood, yeah, the whole thing, yeah.
All of that, of course, it integrates into one body as disease. And so it's important for us to hold in consideration that any of these can be made possible inside of a body that has been under distress for far too long. And so when we're talking about finding ways to heal, I always like to lean into what feels most accessible to any of us. And although it's been popularized, I think, to an extent where I'm so grateful that, excuse me, we're losing some of the stigma around it, but we're also, I think, diluting the methodology of what we actually need to do is deep breathing. I think deep breathing is one of those things that can be made into a practice, into a lifestyle choice that can actually help our nervous system to release some of the traumatic tension, release some of the stress, and with it, the inflammation that then culminates into chronic disease. And the beautiful thing about deep breathing that I love is that if you are a person that is living, you have the capacity to use the breath in order to help your body to feel ease. And more often than not, we need at least 5 minutes in a day to actually integrate deep breathing in a way that can actually have a profound impact. So it's not take 3 deep breaths and then transition into the next thing. It's take the moments when your coffee is brewing, or when you're transitioning from one meeting to the next, or when the kids still haven't woken up, or there is a pause in your day where you can offer yourself anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes to actually regenerate the ways in which your cellular memory is connecting to your environment. And that can have a profound impact for any one of us that is alive today.
And it's free. It's free. And I think there's a reason that so many spiritual traditions think of God as breath, because what else is always with you, right? Like, you might not be able to reach for a Xanax. You might not be able to get to the gym. You might not be able to find a friend to talk to. But I often, how many different religious traditions, prayers does God speak to the beloved, saying, "I'm closer than your breath"? I mean, you're literally taking in life itself, and what loves you so much that it's always with you. And I think that's why breath work has been so beautiful for me. I want to hoard you because you're so extraordinary, and I can feel I'm just watching the hearts and the flames pile up, and seeing the impact that you've had just in this hour on us. But I had one more question, and it's about your sister Lady. She's such a presence in this book, and there's my grandmother used to say, "Show me who you love, and you will show me yourself." So I wonder if you could take a moment and show us yourself by showing us who you love, and telling us what you love about your sister and who she is to you. And if you don't mind, because I really felt her heart in this book as well, and wanted to see if you could share her with us.
Yes, I'd love to. And you can see her make me cry, Liz. Oh my goodness. So, wow. My sister Lady is probably one of the most gentle and kind beings that I've ever gotten a chance to connect with. And lucky me, she's my sister, right? She is somebody who I truly believe embodies the love of God. And she's kind of like that personified. She is such a thoughtful human. She just kind of thinks ahead to how she could be loving and helpful. And Lady receives a lot of love too, and I think it's no coincidence, right? People just feel her love across the different categories of relationships that she has, and we just want to pour into her because it's just so pure. And in part, my desire for us in this world is that we can find the softness within us that can lead us into being more like her, like how she genuinely is. And I aspire to that myself every day. I'm grateful that I get to be so close to a human like that. And one that, despite how much she has suffered, she has kept that beautiful grace and her gentleness. And I think that a lot of that also can be made possible when we heal, when we find our ways into the softness that is also our generational gift, and it's a part of our generational resilience. I think she embodies that and has shown me that personified so that I can make it tangible and available to all of us. So I'm grateful for her.
I'm very moved to hear that. Thank you. And thank you, Lady. And I hope you know that you really seem to be describing yourself as well, by the way. That sounds like, just in the short time that I've met you, I'm like, that sounds like a pretty good description of you. So that also must run in the family. And I just want to close by saying that as somebody who carries a lot of ancestral burden of hyper responsibility, um, you speak in the book about how once we start to heal, a trap that some of us can fall into is that we then want to go heal our families. We want to bring them everything that we've felt, and that may or may not be welcome. It may or may not be successful. It may actually be a trauma response in its own right. It may be survivor's guilt. It may be like, I don't feel okay being the only one who's okay. So now I want to make sure everybody else is okay. And you write about the difference between the desire to help others and the sense of an obligation to help others, which is a stress response that you are required by duty to serve and to help. And there's a lovely list you give at the end of the book about ways that you can show up for your family and your community as you begin to heal. And there's an item on there that, again, I think this is not said enough, and could not be more beautiful. But you write, and to me, it's the most moving line in the whole book. You say, simply showing up as a more healed version of yourself is a way that you can help your community and your lineage. That you don't have to do more than that. I'm assuming that many of the people watching this are people who have a huge sense of obligation and duty, that carry the world on their shoulders, that are trying to figure out how to fix, manage, control, and rescue everybody. And the message that I want to leave everyone with is, in your words, simply showing up as a more healed version of yourself is how you can help others. And if you want proof of what that looks like, it looks like what your presence feels like with us tonight. So I am so moved by you. Thank you so much for being with us. And if everybody could send up some love and gratitude, we thank you for your time, for your work, for the work that you've done on yourself that helps us to be able to help ourselves. And everyone, please go out and make your grandmother's a dream come true, that you will become a bestseller, which I sincerely hope everyone buys. Break the Cycle. I know this is going to show up reversed. A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. Dr. Mariel Buqué, you are a gift to this world.
Thank you. Liz, thank you. It's been such an honor to be with you. Very 360, very humbling. Thank you for this beautiful moment. Thank you, everyone.
We love you.
Oh,
Bye, everybody.